We're connected. You may begin.
All right, thank you. Hello, I am Linda Heisman-Powell, and I serve as Chair of the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Friday, April 10th, 2026. I ask the members of the Advisory Committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being held remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Denise Seisman.
Present.
Allison Bell.
We weren't able to hear Allison, but we can see you on the call. So
Hello, I'm here.
Okay. Well, Alec Bernstein has to miss. Holly Kramer.
Present.
Wes Dotson. Absent. Kelly Harrison.
Present.
Emily Kessler.
and I think Emily was going to have to miss today.
Okay, I knew there was one. I don't know why I unhighlighted her. Pamela Neidert.
Here.
Pick Walliam Chestnut.
Present.
Nikki Wiley.
Present.
And Alice Jean.
Here.
I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye
Here.
and Leslie Allen.
I'm here.
All right. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Linda. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication, allowing members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call, or alternatively, individuals may view the board's meeting on the YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On February 18th, 2026, we sent notice of the meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to .fi@ks.gov with its subject line "Request for the Agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone connect and introduce themselves, I will let you know.
Thank you, David. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda, which just so happens to be approval of the agenda.
I'll move to approve.
I
Thank you.
second.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Kelly. All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Or raise your hand. Thank you for
Aye.
following directions, Denise. All opposed, same sign. All right, motion carries and the agenda is approved. So now, I'm sure you've all had time to read the minutes from the last meeting. Any discussion or questions or corrections noted? No? No? I see several no's. All right. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our previous meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Denise. And Allison Bell seconds. Is that correct, Allison?
Yes, ma'am. I was trying to get to my mute button.
All right. So all in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
All opposed? No opposition, David. The minutes are approved. They're now official. At this point, I'd like to turn it back over to David so he can provide us with his executive director's report.
All right, thank you, Linda. We will begin with some updates on BSRB operations. First, Leslie Allen, the assistant director, and I have done several presentations for groups of students recently. We've talked with students at K-State, Bethel, Fort Hays State. Earlier this spring, we had presentations for students at other colleges and universities. And so this is something we attempt to do either in the fall or the spring for different programs, but we're always looking to make connections with new programs or programs that we haven't offered a presentation to. These presentations cover things like the role of the BSRB and what our focus is with our legislative charge for public protection, but also helping people become licensed. And then during these presentations, we talk about the actual application process and how they can navigate that to ease some concerns or any nervousness about that, and hope it goes smoother because of this information. And then we also spend time being proactive in terms of the public protection mission of the board, talking about the lens of the unprofessional conduct regulations and the expectations when it comes to professional conduct. So we spend time talking about the board's investigative process, what to do if you have a complaint filed against you, your responsibilities under the unprofessional conduct regulation. And so those presentations have been well received. We're continuing to do those. So if you were part of a program that we have not connected to in the past, or you know of programs, please feel free to reach out and we can make contact and put them on the list. Additionally, we've also been working on a few process changes behind the scenes. One of those will affect all state agencies. There is a new system that the Secretary of State's office will be using for changes to regulations. There's a agreement in place between the Secretary of State's office on behalf of the state of Kansas and a company called Esper. And this will move us forward with technology in that process. In the past, for many, many years, it has been a paper-based system with a lot of hand edits, and now we are moving to an electronic system for the regulatory process. So it's a positive change, and we are trying to prepare, and we've done some trainings to make sure that we are ready for that when it comes in. But that's going to be going live here probably, I think, at the beginning of May is what the target is. So you may not see anything from the public side of it, but behind the scenes, we're preparing to make sure we can use that new technology when it does go live. Similarly, we are in the process of preparing for a new requirement for background checks for licensure for new applications. This is something the board has weighed in on in the past. We have joined several multi-state compacts over the last few years, and these compacts do require a background check to practice under the multi-state compacts. And so the board has, discussed should all applicants receive a background check for licensure, and the board was supportive of that. This is a big change, and so to make sure we can do this the right way, we have been working with the KBI who will be facilitating this background check process for us. And we've been in the process of our staff members doing trainings for how to access the information, how to make sure it's all kept confidential. And so we are now in a process where we're very close to going live with our clinical professional counselors. And so the reason we're focusing on that group first is with the professional counseling compact. It is available to individuals that are practicing professional counseling at the clinical or independent level, and they can opt into practicing in that compact, but to do so, they need to have the background check finished. And so we are waiting on our fee regulation for that privilege fee to be approved and go through that regulatory change process. It has previously been reviewed by the Department of Administration and the Attorney General's office, but because of some requested edits, it had to go back through that process. So once it goes fully through, we can make this an option for those clinical professional counselors wanting to practice under that compact. The ultimate goal will be that we will add this as a new requirement for licensure for all applicants. We are not planning on being retroactive and going back and making everyone who's currently licensed have to go back and do a background check. So it'll be mainly focused at new applications, and then for those compacts that require a background check, having an opt-in provision for those people too. So more information on that later this year, but we are very close for that clinical professional counselor group. Another item in terms of operations, I want to make you all aware of the survey that we had talked about at the end of last year and a little bit this spring of licensees that we did last year. Those most of those reports have been now finalized and are published on the BSRB website. We have not sent out an email to all of our licensees yet to thank them for participating and to point to that because there are 7 different reports, and we have finished and posted 5 of the 7, but we are still needing to do a little bit more work on the social work group and also the addiction counselors. Social work was the group that we did the latest in the year. I think that was around July and August when we pulled those members. So we are close to having all 7 reports up and published, but for the behavior analysis report, that is finalized, it is published. You can access that on the website for the BSRB under our resources, and then there's a page for publications, and you can see past surveys of licensees on that page. And once we have all 7 reports up, we will send a message out to let everyone know where they can access the information. In terms of other items, I'll give you some legislative updates now. The legislature typically meets every spring for about 90 days. We are in the very end of that process this year. Essentially, what has happened over the last couple of weeks, the legislature made a big push to pass bills before they left for a break. And the reason why they do that is because how bills become law, the legislature has to have those bills passed by both chambers, and then they will be sent to the governor, and the governor has 3 choices when bills reach her desk. She can either sign those into law, she can veto those, or she can take no action, and if she takes no action for a certain number of days, the bill becomes law without a signature. And so the legislature does return for something that's called a veto session. Sometimes it's called a veto override session or even omnibus, all terminology for this time period. And so the legislature did return yesterday. They are considering veto overrides for some of the bills that were vetoed. When it comes to the budget bill, the governor does have authority to do line item vetoes and veto just certain sections of the appropriations bill, but that's unique to the appropriations bill. It's usually either vetoing the entire bill or not vetoing the bill at all. And so the legislature is deciding which ones they want to attempt veto overrides. Potentially during this time period, the legislature can pass additional bills as well, but that number of new bills passed at this time period is usually really small. So we, in terms of when it's all going to finish, the legislature, like I said, typically goes 90 days. According to their calendar, they were scheduled to come back and be here yesterday and today. Potentially, they could also be here tomorrow, working on a Saturday. They are not bound to only having this time period. If a legislative leadership decides they need to stay additional days, they could basically pass something that would extend their time period being here. But they are well within the 90 days. So this could go longer, or it could wrap up tonight, or it could wrap up tomorrow. But in terms of legislative updates affecting the committee, there were a number of bills that were discussed by the legislature this year. A lot of those bills did not move forward to actually being passed by both chambers. Some of the bills that affect regulatory boards have also been vetoed by the governor. There was a bill that dealt with basically occupational boards, but it carved out a lot of the health professions, and it dealt with a reporting requirement, essentially like a sunset provision, but not a full sunset provision. So that bill did pass. It exempted the BSRB and several other agencies, and then the governor vetoed it. So we're waiting to see if that will be overturned or not. There was some language on the topic of DEI that was in a standalone bill that had a hearing, but the bill did not move forward. And some of that language on the topic of DEI as it related to university requirements for certain degrees, it was put in as a proviso in the appropriations bill. So that did move forward. But like I said, we're kind of in the process of just monitoring what happens today, maybe tomorrow, and then we'll be able to kind of clean things up once the dust settles. Sometimes it's a little complicated this time of year too, because what often is being passed by the legislature are conference committee reports. When you have a bill that has been passed by both chambers with some modification or item of difference, they have the ability to agree to the other chamber's changes, or alternatively, you can request a conference committee to resolve the items of difference and come up with a consensus bill. But sometimes when that happens, parts of other bills get put in and it becomes more of a, they call it a shell, essentially. And so you have pieces of lots of bills that are sometimes combined and voted on by the legislature. But for tracking purposes, that gets really messy, and it's hard to kind of know what's included in some of these bills unless you are really following them very, very closely, or someone has reached out to inform you of where things are ending up. And so we're doing our best to track things, but that's where we're at right now. Um, and then I'll just provide a couple of updates from recent board meetings. The board of the BSRB did meet in March. One of the items the board is continuing to work through is that grid of all the unprofessional conduct regulation proposed changes. The board is also looking to see, future goals for the entire board. So the board is moving forward on a strategic plan for multiple years, and they're continuing to get prepared for that conversation. Some of that may happen this summer or later on this fall, but I think it's a good policy the board is working on. Um, the board also was looking at recommendations from advisory committees. One of the items that was considered was some of the committees had forward proposals on recommendations for the regulation of artificial intelligence. And so the board did consider 3 of those proposed changes, or at least recommendations for maybe adjustments to unprofessional conduct language. So the board considered recommendations from your committee, the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee, and the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee. Since only about half of the committees have reported so far, the board did not take a position on those yet. I think they will wait to see if there's other recommendations from the committees that have not made recommendations yet, and then they will probably decide, should there be something standardized, should it just be for certain professions, or how they want to move forward. The board did identify the date for its usual out-of-town planning meeting, and that is going to be on Monday, September 28th this year. The board has this as sort of an all-day meeting to work on topics that require in-depth discussion. And so they always come together in person for this meeting. It is open to the public. We've done a good job of moving this meeting around the state to also allow individuals in different parts of the state to attend these meetings. So basically about 4 years ago, we had it in Overland Park. Then we had it in Wichita. The following year, it was in Lawrence. And then last year, we had it in Manhattan. So this year, the plan is to have it in Kansas City, Kansas. That's where one of the major population centers of the state is, and where a lot of the board members also live. So it's been about 4 years since we've had it in that location. So we're going to have it in KCK, and we'll have more information on the specific location here in the near future. And then one item that's of note for the next board meeting, it'll take place on May 11th, and we will have a special guest. So the CEO of the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, ASPPB, she has a goal of connecting with all the different states and jurisdictions that regulate the profession of psychology. And so she has made it a goal to go out and visit about 5 or 6 of those in person per year. And so she's been doing this for about 3 or 4 years. I talked to her in the fall of last year and said if she ever wants to visit Kansas, just let us know and we'd be happy to coordinate something. And so she reached out. We looked at dates for conflicts, and so she'll be here in person at that May meeting. So I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. She will probably just be meeting board members, and she may make just a comment at the board meeting itself, but she's going to be attending that meeting as well. So. But yeah, we are moving forward on a lot of endeavors right now at the board, preparing for some of the upcoming mid-year meetings for some of the conferences, and things are going well, but happy to answer any questions on operations, legislative updates, or board meetings if you have any questions.
I do just want to let you guys know that ASPPB person that's coming to visit, ASPPB is to psychology like the BACB is to us, right? They're the agency that has developed the EPPP, which is that national exam that psychologists have to take and pass at 2 different levels, the master's degree and the doctorate degree. So it's kind of a big deal that they're coming out to visit and meet with board members and whatnot. So we're happy to host them this year. Anybody have any questions for David? No? All right. Well, on that note then, unless you have anything else, David?
Nope, that's all I have.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is updates from the regulators meeting at APBA annual meeting, where we were invited to attend by the BACB as regulators for behavior analysts for the state. And our fearless leader, David, got up and took the mic and started a survey of other regulators around the country that specifically with regards to title protection. And then he did a follow-up email out to people, and we have started to get replies from other states and jurisdictions about whether or not they have title protection built into their legislation and what it looks like. So, David, do you want to give us an update about the takeaways from our regulators meeting at APBA? Besides the fact that as behavior analysts, we know how to party. And so the closing ceremony, they blocked off the street and gave everybody beads and masks and had a band. And we all of us behavior analysts went out there and marched down the streets of New Orleans with the police blocking off traffic and following the band. It was pretty awesome. Wasn't it, David?
It was pretty impressive. Yeah, it's funny. Next year, we have heard that the conference is going to be in Kansas City.
Yeah. Woo.
So there will be an opportunity for some of you probably to attend that if you are in the area. I do think has been a really helpful opportunity for us to connect with regulators, but it's also been really helpful for me to learn more about the behavior analysis profession. I attended several of the conference meetings, and there were a couple of them that really talked about the history of the profession and some of the ways that BACB handles things like disciplinary topics and complaints and investigations. And so there's a lot that I picked up from that helps me in my position, but also connecting with the regulators specifically. It has been helpful to have a good conversation about the growth of the profession. Seems like a lot of states are seeing a trend where, the behavior analysis profession, it's continuing to grow. It's one of the fastest growing professions that we regulate for sure, maybe the fastest growing. But having conversations about, as we are looking for to be helpful in terms of workforce, talking to different states about have they had success concerning the assistant behavior analyst and having that level get licensed, and getting more people sort of into that area, or how those states regulate or don't regulate RBTs and other lower level assistants or technicians. And so we did get into the topic of title protection, and we do have that on the agenda for a little bit later in the meeting. But I have some feedback from a few different states in terms of if they have title protection, if they do, what specifically is protected, and then some of their statutory references. So I've got some information to share with you later on the agenda, but it was really a good opportunity to connect. And there is another meeting for regulators later this year. So Linda and I will be attending that meeting. But I think these meetings are helpful because I think we talked about ASPPB for psychologists and how that association that helps regulatory boards has been established. It's really well organized and set up. And I feel that for the behavior analysis profession, we're in sort of the beginning steps to have the regulators come together and have something that looks a little bit differently when it comes to licensure versus the traditional type of practice when it was more about being certified under the different organizations versus state licensure. So I think this is a natural progression moving towards more of these groups coming together and figuring out how you want to move forward. But I forget the exact number of states that license behavior analysts, but it's somewhere around maybe 38 or 39. So I think, now the majority of states are licensing behavior analysts. There's still some that it sounds like do not have licensure, but that number is a smaller number than it has been in the past. So, but yeah, a really positive experience, and it was also helpful to get connected with BACB in terms of their listserv to also collect more feedback from some of those licensing states. So.
Mhm. One of the things that was interesting is, we can lament the low numbers of assistant behavior analysts, because if we had a really robust assistant population, it would help spread the limited behavior analysts that we have, the BCBAs. But that problem is not unique to Kansas. Most of the boards that were represented there had the same issue, except for, which one, David? Which one was it? Louisiana?
I'm not sure I
One
remember.
of them, Alabama. One of them had like I don't know, over 1,000 BCABAs, or so. Yeah, it was like a huge number. They had more BCABAs than they did RBTs or something like that.
I don't
It
think
was
there's that many
crazy.
BCABAs certified though.
Huh?
There's like less than 1,000 BCABAs certified in there.
Well, they're all in the state then. I don't know how many it was. I didn't write it down and I don't have it here, but how many do we have in Kansas? Like 5? Yeah.
Well,
Like
it's
less than 20 for sure.
I was gonna say, yeah, my guess would have been somewhere between 20 and 25. I think the number
Nikki,
is
what's
small.
your number? What's your BACB number rather? Or LBA number?
Who are you asking?
Nikki, because she's a
Nikki.
BCABA.
I don't know my number. I'm so sorry.
And I can tell you as of March, yeah, 25 LABAs and
Okay.
634 LBAs. So
Yeah. Yeah, there were a lot. Everybody in the room was amazed at how many assistant behavior analysts they had, but they built it that way to start to try to grow and reinforce people getting that level of credential to address workforce shortage. So Pam and Pick Law, as people that are in universities, start growing that BCABA level, encourage those undergrads to sit for the exam when they get their bachelor's degree,
I think part
so
of
we
it is
can
that,
start addressing the workforce shortage.
but part of
Funny
it
that
is
you
that the
say that.
workforce
We
doesn't.
literally just revised the undergraduate curriculum to align with ABAI accreditation so that all majors from the department will be eligible to sit, at least they've completed the content portion the ABA exam,
I
BCABA.
must have been channeling my thoughts your
Yeah,
direction.
yeah.
and
Good
Alice,
for you.
I think Allison had a comment as well. Did you have a comment on this topic?
Part of it is that the insurance companies are not paying for it. I mean, the BCABA does qualify for the autism specialist, which is good, but outside of that, they're not paying them any differently.
No, Allison, that's not quite correct. The BCABAs aren't qualified for autism specialist. They're ranked in the same category as BCBAs with state plan Medicaid services,
Okay, I think
which means you can bill down the same rate.
yeah, no, that's what I'm saying is that outside of that, though, there are like the other insurance companies, United Healthcare, like the big insurance companies that have a lot of policies here, like UMR, United Healthcare, Aetna, Cigna, blah, blah, blah. All
You
of them,
know,
they don't recognize the BCABA like Blue Cross Blue
yeah,
Shield and Medicaid do.
and but with Blue Cross Blue Shield State Employee Health Plan, they will recognize it. At
Yeah.
least that's my understanding that they
Blue
will.
Cross Blue Shield does because they
Yeah,
qualify for the CCTS. So with
yep,
the CCTS, they can serve and be considered
correct.
as a. But that's
So that's an
only
advocacy thing. I see an advocacy push for grassroots and Consaba.
yeah. I mean it's on the agenda, but yeah, we have.
Well, if you want my opinion, you know how to get in touch with me.
I sure do.
All right. Do you have anything else to add about the regulators meeting?
No, this will basically be a yearly thing. Like I said, there's going to be sort of a second meeting for regulators. So Linda and I will be attending that later on this year. But we did want to let you all know that the main meeting was moving to Kansas City. So for some of you that have not had the opportunity to attend, maybe this will be a better opportunity for you to do that. I will continue to attend these meetings with Linda because I do think that the regulator part of it is really helpful. But there's also some specific sessions that are helpful either as talking about the field itself and the history, or things that are kind of towards regulators. So it's been a good experience. Yeah.
It has been really, and I appreciate the BACB working and APBA working together to pull regulators together so that we have a community of other people who are charged with regulating the practice of behavior analysis, and so that we can draw on the experiences of each other. So it really has been a good thing. Anyway. So at this point, we'll move on to old business. Continued discussion on regulation KAR 102-8-6 supervision. Now, right now, I don't believe that there's a lot of clarity in our legislation about supervision or supervisory practices. Do you have that KAR 102-8-6?
Yes, I have that pulled up. Would you like me to share my screen?
Please.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go ahead. This is included in your packet as well, and I'll try to make the text a little bit bigger, but feel free to take a look. This is the current regulation that deals with supervision, KAR 102-8-6. And at the last couple of meetings, I think the advisory committee has talked about, this regulation has not been updated or changed since 2016. But if there are things that are the sort of the national standard that some of the national associations are following when it comes to supervision, it may be helpful to consider our requirements for supervision, or at least some of these processes, more closely with what the national associations are requiring. That's what I recall about the conversation. And I think at the last meeting, maybe some of the members of the committee were going to volunteer to come back to this meeting with some information about the sort of the national standards for supervision or the national practices that the associations are using. So if there's any members that have recommended changes to this regulation, we could talk about any of those topics or something else. And Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the board, is also on the call too. Leslie is the member of the staff that really does a lot of work when we do have suggested edits to the minutes or the regulations here. So Leslie's also on the call if you have questions for her about things that could be modified in the regulation.
Have we had anybody submit a request to the board for group supervision to exceed 50% of the supervision experiences? Do we have anything? And there's nothing in here either where we require a licensed BCABA to provide the board with information about who their supervisor is, or require supervisors to inform anybody about the number of BCABAs that they're supervising?
I do think it would be meaningful if we're talking about editing this, to have that and being able to like claim them like we do on the BACB's website. But we do have to claim them already, so I don't know if that's.
Yeah, but as the regulatory board in Kansas, there's no method outlined here that allows us to follow up with assistant behavior analysts or BCBAs to make sure they have, like in other professions, you have to submit a plan to the board and get it approved.
Linda,
Yeah.
that is just for people working on clinical hours.
Okay.
They have to submit a plan to the board and it has to be pre-approved for ongoing supervision or direction. We do not require a plan. We have a definition and they have to keep logs and everything. And then they have to turn that in at renewal if they're audited.
So what about for the master's level psychologists though that cannot practice independently?
They have to be under direction. And
Right.
when they renew, they have to list their supervisor, and
Right.
when they're audited, then they have to sign a form, have their supervisor sign a form.
Correct, but they have to list their supervisor because at this point, we don't know who the assistant behavior analysts supervisors are because they don't have to submit anything to us, correct?
Let me look at the renewal form.
And so according to this, for those of you who are supervising, assistant behavior analysts, each one of you have to maintain documentation for at least 3 years after the date of supervision. So
Yes, when an LABA renews their license, on their form to renew, it asks if they're working in a position that requires them to hold a LABA license, and then they have to list the name of their LBA supervisor.
okay.
So we get that on renewals like we do with everyone else.
Yes, and we put their license number too. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my hard copy right now.
And so do they have to submit that with their initial application?
No.
You know? And I think part of the discussion was, so this is specifically about LABAs. But there's also a requirement, and I think this is part of the discussion that was that we had in New Orleans, I think, David, was BCBAs, if they have RBTs underneath them, they're also required to provide supervision to them. Now that is monitored by the BACB, and we don't regulate the behavioral technician level in Kansas. So there would be no reason to have LBAs report the number of BTs that they're supervising because that's regulated by the BACB. But what do you guys think of this regulation? Is this the where we have the flexibility to change language, David and Leslie?
Yes. So just to kind of frame this, the hierarchy goes from the statutory language first, And if the statutory language says something specific, the regulation can't contradict. But the regulation is really where you can flush out more of how to implement the state law that's at a higher level in the statutes usually. And the statutory authority for this specific one is, in my opinion, a little bit broad. So you do have some flexibility here because the statute is KSA 65-7505. And it basically says the board shall adopt rules and regulations necessary to implement and administer this act, which is the Licensure Act. Such rules and regulations shall include, but be not limited to, and then there's a number of different things identified in a list there. Items E and F include that the board would put rules and regulations forward for the characteristics of supervision and supervised clinical practicum experience for the licensed behavior analyst and the licensed assistant behavior analyst. And then under F, rules and regulations for the supervision of licensed behavior analyst and licensed assistant behavior analysts. So it kind of gives some broad authority. It just says that essentially the board will come up with regulations to cover those topics. And so this does satisfy that. But because it is, most of these things are just in regulation, there's a lot of flexibility to make changes here.
Mhm. Because it just says, so let's say you had an LABA that was working 40 hours a week. You only have to meet with them once a month, and it doesn't specify, it could be 15 minutes. No, it says 1 hour. So, or you could have somebody that's working 3 hours a week and they still have to have an hour.
I will
So
tell
if
you
you-
the difference between the state and the the BACB is that it puts it in percentages. So it's a percentage of what you do. So it's 2%. So yeah, the person who's working 3 hours only has to get 2% supervision for that.
Sorry, wait, who's putting it in a percentage?
The BACB.
Okay, the
So I
BAC.
have to meet 2% of what I actually of supervisory work that I do. I have to meet 2% of supervision of that. The initial is 5%, but it knocks down after you get your first 1,000 hours.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm following. Thank you.
That's why we love having you on the board, Nikki. You're not allowed to leave. You're in perpetuity.
I will say I'm in my last semester of my master's program, so I will be bumping up.
Oh, dang it. But you'll still have experience. So what are you guys thinking? Are you thinking you want to leave it broad like this as we try to grow the assistant behavior analyst option to help address workforce capacity? Do we want it to be tied a little bit closer so that everybody's working off one system instead of having to match to two different systems?
And I may need to add on to this later, but I do want to propose something else that's differentiated between how many CEUs we have to get compared to the BACB. So for the state, I have to get 30, but for the BACB, I only have to get 20.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it makes sense to change the 1 hour to a percentage.
Yeah,
That really makes a lot of sense to me.
it does to me as well, but
I have a question. So I see. I don't have a question now. I see that there, because I was like 2 sessions, so you can interpret sessions in a different way, right? But it did see like at least 1 hour each, so
yeah,
fine.
yeah. What does everybody else think about changing that to a percentage of worked hours? 5% in your first year after licensing, and 2% in each subsequent year.
I like that better. I think the more we can align it, the better.
It's
Yeah,
different
and
from
then
the
yeah,
BACBs
that,
though.
huh?
I said that's still different from the BACBs.
Not a, that's what Nikki just said.
No, she said 1,000 hours. So once you're certified, it's 5% for the first 1,000 hours, and then after that, it's 2%. So I know
Okay.
splitting hairs, but it's still different. And this is, if David Fye has taught me nothing, we have to split every hair.
So, 5% for the first 1,000 hours worked after licensing, followed
ma'am.
by 2%.
Yes, ma'am.
That sounds good.
All right. Leslie, David, what do you think about that?
I was about to ask Leslie what her thoughts were in terms of if that could be an easy modification to match the existing language.
So they want 5% supervision.
For the first 1,000 hours after initial licensing.
Okay, but how, okay, I don't understand.
So I have to maintain that. I have to have my logs that show that how much I worked that week, and then I have to calculate the percentage of then how much supervision I need within those hours. And then I have to personally document that every month.
So if you had 30 hours, you have to have 5%
For the first initial 1,000
hours of
hours.
supervision.
And then after the first 1,000 hours after my certification, it's 2%. It knocks down to 2%.
Right. No, I get the 2 and 5. I'm trying to figure out how you get to 5%, what the 5%
Yes.
is.
I go off,
Okay.
I work 40 hours a week. I'm in supervisory activities that whole time, 5% or 2% of that.
And it's still per month, right, Nikki?
Yes. Yeah, I have to sign a
per month
documentation
for
every month.
1,000 hours. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that 1,000 hour is for the initial certification, not
Right.
the every
Nope.
research. Okay, okay, that's my question. Okay.
It's just that initial one, with the thought being, as people first come out, they need a little bit of extra mentorship as they start their practice.
Okay. I'll have to talk to them about how to word it, but
And my only other suggestion when I was reviewing this was I wondered if we wanted to add anything about what we wanted included in the documentation. I'm not super familiar with the BACB, BCABA documentation off the top of my head, but I imagine it's probably similar to the RBT where you have to include specific, I don't know, dates, what you did, things like that in the documentation. Is that true, Nikki?
I think Nikki just pulled out her binder. Did you see that?
I did.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, I have to put my name, my certification number, my supervisor's name that will be signing it, her certification, and then I have to mark, is it within that 5% or 2%? The meeting date, duration of time, and then the type. So was it individual or small group? I don't know if the state cares. And then service observation, was I seen with the client, and then just sign and date at the end of the month.
Yeah. Because I don't think, I think the state, I think we, because we are the state at this point, we are probably would want them to document whether it was individual supervision or group supervision, because that is called out in this regulation.
And let me correct myself. I have to sign this for every supervision. So this is per supervision.
Yeah. And, but the,
I have a question. So
yeah,
the documentation, I see that how long do you need to like keep the documentation, like, because Like you will have to keep the materials for how many years? Is that right? Because I remember when trying to be a BCBA or whatever, you have to keep all your documentation up to several years. Is there a requirement for that as well?
Bottom of it says 7 years, doesn't it, Nikki?
Yeah, it's 7 years for the
What?
BACB, and then it's 3 years for the state.
Oh, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
I have a question. Could we figure out how to word it so that we don't have to do that twice? Because that's crazy.
I can't, what, Allison, I'm having a really hard time hearing you.
Oh, bummer.
It just sounds quiet on your
Very,
end.
very quiet.
How about now?
It's a little bit better. Yeah.
I don't know why my mic's being silly then. I'll mess with that in a little bit. But my question is, can we use the BACB's documentation if we're trying to break down barriers that's preventing people from becoming BCABAs? Paperwork is one of those barriers.
Mhm.
So if we have to do that twice, that feels really.
Why are you thinking we have to
redundant.
do it twice?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Would we accept the documentation that we do for the BACB for the
No.
LABA?
I don't see why we wouldn't if it has the elements in it that that Nikki was just talking about with her license number, her, you know, her supervisor, whether it was, what was it, whether it was direct service or
Yep.
in-person observation, which is in here as well. It is I thought it said up here that one of them, at least one had to be, or at least two had to be in person. Yeah. Under section 1B1, at least two of the supervision sessions shall be conducted in person and direct observation.
As a heads up, Nikki and I are leaving in like 2 minutes.
Okay.
So it looks like on the BACB website, there's a BCABA supervision meeting form. I'm assuming that's what Nikki's filling out each time she has supervision. Yeah. So that's where I could see, would it be a problem if somebody filled that out and turned it into the Kansas Licensing Board, because it says there's a big header on it that says BACB, BCABA supervision meeting form. Do we care that it has their letterhead if they're giving it to us?
We
and
would
it's
accept
me?
it. We would
Sorry.
accept it, even if it says BACB.
Great. So then, yeah, I think we wouldn't have to do that twice.
Yeah.
Could we even put into this here, like documentation must require these specific things? Should you use the BCABA supervision meeting form, you will meet those requirements?
That's a Leslie
No.
question.
Yeah, we tend not to. We try to avoid referencing specific entities.
Right.
Just kind of go with some of the same language. That way, if they make a change, we wouldn't agree with. We're not bound to it unless we decide to make a change ourselves. So.
Oh, that makes sense, because if they updated their form, we'd have to immediately update our requirements. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, does anybody else see anything in here? Anything else in here? Changing it to percent of applicable activities, which would be working with a client, directing a technician, writing a program, teaching the technician how to implement that program, reviewing data, making program changes.
You want all of that in the regulation?
I don't think, could we put something in there that would say, where it says shall include direct observation of the supervisee's provision of applied behavior analytics services, I don't like the term to clients because it should be with. Or to get rid of clients and behavior analytic, the provision of applicable applied behavior analytic services. And then I don't know if you can have an in parentheses, like, for example, working with a client, instructing a behavioral technician, etc.
Either, I mean, you can't put parentheses. You
Okay.
could put shall include but not limited to, or but then you have to be really specific, because if it's not in that list and you want it included, they're not going to know that.
Because I think
So I
there's
don't
a
want,
lot of things that can be included in that supervision meeting, or
Mhm.
that observation outside of direct services with clients. Because really that BCABA is working with those technicians and they're coming up with program changes. They're reviewing data and making programming decisions. So it's an active activity that is all related to those behavior analytics services. Does anybody in here disagree with me?
I don't I'm not disagreeing with you, Linda. I just want to clarify, because I think all the activities you mentioned is allowable. It's just the two of those meetings needs to be observing direct service to clients, right? Because, like, for example, supervising RBTs or like program modification and data analysis and all that is okay. It's just two of those has to be some kind of direct interaction with clients. That's kind of how I interpreted it.
Mhm.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Can we change the word to? It sets my teeth on edge.
I don't know, because that could have been Department of Administration, but we can try.
I think that objectifies clients.
Yeah, I agree. I do have, I believe there's a difference in BACB. They don't require it has to be in person, because this one says in person. I'm just curious, because I'm like, if a ABA is in a rural area in someone's home, like, I don't see a problem with the LBA conducting that supervision remotely, as long as it's live and everything. So,
And not video recorded. I tend to agree with you, and then I'll quit talking and let other people chime in. Because that right there, the thing that does is that requires the behavior, the BCBA to be the one to travel to the rural area, or it requires somebody from Dodge to grab their client and drive up to Atchison, right? So that the BCBA can watch them in person. I mean, that's a huge burden on the BCBA.
so I feel like it could be more flexible. It has to be synchronous, but it doesn't have to be in person. That's my opinion, and I will also quit talking.
I'm agreeing with Alice and Linda for sure. I think in section B, because it says involving real-time visual and audio contact, I guess that's how I was assuming then that they are interpreting in person to be defined. because it's like B1, right? It's like, is that how I read this? Like the supervision shall include the following. So one applies to what is said in B, but we could definitely make it clearer, I think, just by using a word like synchronous instead of in
Yeah.
person.
Well,
Or perhaps just
so in
require.
the other professions regulations, they do allow supervision to be done live via televideo. So we can use language that we already have in place and put it in B, and then say that at least 2 of the 12 sessions shall be conducted with the supervisee and shall include, and strike in person. Everything has to be live interactive supervision, and it can be done by televideo or in person.
Yeah.
Okay.
With a client present. With a client, not to a client. And then I think the last line in there was our attempt at the time to mirror what was required from the BACB, so that no more than 50% could be group supervision.
Mhm. And you want that change?
No, I think that was that's where that came from.
Okay.
I don't think anybody would want that changed, would you guys? I mean, that pretty much matches. Um, and then and then C, I think, is where we could have clarity about what documentation should entail. Because then that also documents number 2, so that they reviewed, discussed, and made recommendations focusing on the supervisee's practice of applied behavior analysis.
So that I'm clear, in the beginning, it says each licensed LABA shall receive at least 12 supervision sessions annually, and you want that to change? Or are we keeping 12 annually, but at least 12 annually, but in the first 1,000 hours, it has to be 5%? So it would be more often, maybe?
Well, 12 sessions, so monthly sessions that would equal a percent of hours that were spent in behavior analytic practices, with the first 1,000 hours after initial licensing requiring 5%. So you'd have to reverse that during the first year, or for the first 1,000 hours of provision of behavior analytics services following initial licensing, supervision sessions must or shall represent 5% of the hours worked. Each subsequent year of licensing shall require 2% of worked hours spent conducting behavior analytics services. Did that sound right to everybody left on this call?
I think, I don't think it's annually, right? It's not per year anymore. It's just per month.
I don't know if we're allowed to plagiarize, but I have it pulled up.
Thank you.
So it says supervision must comprise at least 5% of the total number of behavior analytics service hours provided per month, with no less than 1 hour of supervision every 2 weeks. And then after the first 1,000 hours, supervision must comprise at least 2% of the total behavior analytics service hours provided per month, is how they phrased it.
Yeah. And so if we adopted that language, which was a lot more succinct than how I was saying it, Piqua has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just want to kind of like put this idea out there. I think I don't know if we have to be the exact match with the board, but I was thinking that if we could just kind of like put the 2% on the annual thing so that we don't have to worry the first 1,000 hour right after when they first certify. You know what I'm saying? So that would be like very hard to track. So if any individual will be meeting the board's, sort of the BACB's requirement, then they will automatically meet our requirement. And then so that can just remain consistency. That's just kind of a thought and an idea. So that kind of like simplifies some of this like messy situations that we are kind of discussing. But of course, like we can like maintain the highest standard and match exactly with the board. I'm okay with that too. But I think that, for us, our role is just like, are these individuals following what is needed? And then for us, maintaining a consistency might be easier for us to kind of manage. That's
I like that
Okay.
idea.
Yeah, I can see Leslie nodding her head as well.
It's not up to me though, but it would be
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah.
It would simplify it, definitely.
And I agree with what Piqua just said, is that ours can be 2%, and if they're meeting the BACB, then we know they meet our standard. And it's
And
only for the first 1,000 hours.
right, and I did some math, and for those working full time, that's 1,000 hours is just the first half a year-ish, and they will be moving on to the 2%. So
Yeah.
maybe the half years is not worth our effort here to kind of like juggle with the language. So that's just kind of a thought.
I think everybody likes that thought. Does anybody not like that thought? Here's your opportunity to jump in, Leslie.
I think I like that thought
Okay.
because we don't track their work hours like ECB does.
So I like the way that the way that the BACB framed it, but we could just take out the 5% part.
Okay.
I didn't think you could do reactions on here. And then the documentation, 2C. Documentation, each supervisor and each supervisee shall maintain documentation of the supervision experience. And then putting in there, documentation shall include the name and license number of the supervisee, the name and license number of the supervisor. It shall document whether it's individual supervision or group supervision. And who has the form pulled up? It will document what was discussed.
I've got it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think the ones missing, it has to include the date
Okay.
an hour of all service delivery every day. And then when you have supervision, it has to include the date and time of that supervision, the format, in person or online, supervision type, like Linda said. Um, and then it says date supervisor observed BCABA providing service delivery, which seems repetitive to date, but
Right.
I believe it's both. Yeah.
And I think we could get that under type. It could be review, recommendation, or direct observation, or something like that. Because if we know they're meeting those BCABA, just to channel Pickwa here, if we know they're meeting the BCABA requirements, then we know they're meeting ours. But if we need to see that, we can request that documentation, and all elements will be in there. All right.
Okay.
Was that clear as mud, Leslie?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back and actually, well, look at the documentation online.
Okay.
And then I can go back and make sure I have the right language from the recorded version of the meeting. So it'll be okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
By the way, there was a comment about continuing education requirements for assistant behavior analysts, and I did take the opportunity to research that, and I am seeing that the BACB only requires 20 hours for the assistant behavior analyst. I would like to probably poll the states that license assistant behavior analysts to see what number they fall at. To see, is there a 30-hour requirement lining up with states that license assistant behavior analysts, or are they more in line with what BACB requires? So I'll go ahead and I'll start to pull on that question too, and then we can maybe revisit that at a future meeting if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are going to be good topics of discussion in Colorado later this year too. Like, and how they're monitoring that. Yeah. Awesome. And that this discussion kind of feeds into the next one, because all of our discussion has centered around the main agency that we've all held up as the gold standard, which is the BACB and their guidelines. There's other states out there that are allowing other alternative pathways to licensing, such as the QABA, who has, come before us before. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts, David?
Well, so I think the legislature is always interested in having more people enter the workforce as long as the standards are appropriate and public protection is the primary issue that the board is charged to oversee. That's part of the reason why, when we do our discussion with students, I explain why we have licensure in general. And I even go back to like the Wild Wild West. And I say, think about the stories you've seen on TV or movies where someone goes town to town and talks about a magic elixir. And basically there was a reason why these things were put in place to make sure that things were standardized. There was protection, there was education, training, and so it stood up a lot of these professions with good standards, good requirements, and so In terms of helping more people into the workforce, that is a priority of the legislature. In terms of the behavior analyst profession, like I mentioned earlier, it's one of the fastest growing professions. I guess the real question is, do you have thoughts on other models that would be appropriate to still make sure that the standards are being met and the public is being protected? Would there be things that would allow more people to enter the workforce while also preserving what needs to be the appropriate standards? So I think one of the conversations other advisory committees are having on this topic is, are there things in place that are an unnecessary barrier? Are there things that are too difficult or unfair in terms of, let's say, licensing examinations and other factors that people might have conversations about? For your profession, I don't know. Linda, the topic that you brought up is one that could be considered under this category. One of the topics that I brought up at that meeting we just came to was whether states have been creative in helping more assistant behavior analysts get licensed as an option to help with workforce as well. The legislature is always looking to see, can you get more people into the pipeline at a lower level? It sounds like with the RBTs that are not regulated by a lot of states, that is sort of part of the way that some people start to get involved in this area. I'm not saying that I think we should license everyone who's filling every role. So I'm not saying that I would encourage the RBT licensure in Kansas, but it is something that I'm educating myself on. And every time we meet with those people from other states, I ask them how many states are licensing RBTs, and it seems there's only a very small handful that are. So that doesn't appear to be one of the alternative, practices that we can learn from. But yeah, there's lots of ways to consider this question. Originally, this question was referred to the advisory committees by the chair of the board to kind of think outside the box and consider the existing infrastructure to see, are there different ways that we can approach things? The existing requirements for licensure are largely in statute. So if you wanted to make significant changes, those would probably require a bill to go before the legislature. So there's always things to weigh in that process too. But hopefully that kind of helps frame this topic a little bit and kind of explain some of the factors that we could be thinking about under this topic. If you have ideas on alternatives for the traditional licensure, we can talk about those. But hopefully that helps in terms of why this is on the agenda, and then also maybe some of the things other advisory committees are talking about.
So I know that just for me, the biggest one out there that keeps coming up is that QABA. It's recognized in Texas and Washington, North Carolina, Arkansas. So it's not many, right? It's only 4, at least from what I can see here. But then, there's California, Florida, Colorado, Idaho, and West Virginia that still don't have a licensing law for behavior analysts. So, what do you guys think?
I have a question. So it sounds, I think from earlier discussions, it sounds like we have an opportunity to get more professionals in the field by looking at encouraging individuals to go into the assistant behavioral analyst position. And so to me, that would, given that that's a ripe opportunity, that might make more sense than licensing BTs. I guess my question is what role would our board, the BSRB, take in trying to promote that in terms of getting more individuals in the assistant behavioral analyst positions?
We tell Pam and Pittwa that they need to go out there and
Okay.
recruit for us?
Yeah, Denise, it's a great question.
It is a good question.
Because a lot of the conversations that I have heard with different groups is that some of this starts with increased exposure and education at a lower age, maybe when people are going through even like high school or something like that.
Mhm.
They're being made more aware of existing professions in some of these fields. And I'm honestly not sure what role that we could play in that conversation, because that's really we mainly have jurisdiction over individuals when they are, applying for licensure or when they're licensed, or when they're practicing when they should be licensed. But most of the people, they come under our jurisdiction at that point. And so I think we want to be supportive of the fields, but the advocacy efforts, it seems more like that would fall maybe on different partners. So.
Well, it could be one slide in a talk that you give when you go out and meet with students or universities and stuff. Maybe you could just broaden the definition of students to include those that are enrolled in vocational programs instead of, as well as those that are on track to go to institutions of higher education. I can tell you that out in the field, a lot of the behavioral technicians that work with our clients, particularly in college towns, are freshman college students who need a part-time job, right? And so, I think just in general, educating people about the different options available to them for each of the professions that you oversee, David, right? One of which is behavior analysts, but speaking to interested student groups, including high school students or vocational students. How many of those how many of those did you do? You did an employer forum? You
Yeah,
did,
we've done employer forums, we've done sort of a more broad educational forum, and then we do the specific program type presentations. Um, and one area that we've seen something similar. Well, it's likely very different, but there's a comparison here, at least for social work. We've seen
yeah,
a shift in terms of the types of licensees in that area. Overall, the number of social workers continues to increase in Kansas, but the number of bachelor's level social workers has gone down compared to 10 years ago. Because what we've seen is people are staying in school longer, getting a master's degree, and moving to that at higher level, which is helping them get better reimbursements. And then it also provides more of a connected path to get to the independent level of licensure, that clinical level. So in the last 10 years, our number of clinical social workers has gone from 2,000 to about 3,500. That is really almost doubled. And the number of master's level has increased by almost the decrease in our bachelor's social worker. But what we're hearing from a lot of the employers is the area of need that they have right now are those lower level type positions. And so what I sometimes talk with groups of students that have a bachelor's program and a master's program, some of the messaging that I hear is, well, you could get a bachelor's license, but really if you're staying in school, maybe you would just skip that level of license until you finished your master's program and then just go for the master's level license at that point. So I think some of the messaging, at least from some of the schools, is saying, instead of working at that lower level while you're finishing classes for a higher level, um, just skip that lower level entirely. And so, like I said, we're not really advocating for any of the professions, but we do want to be helpful in this conversation. And so that is something that I've heard. And if we can have more people at that lower level, I think that would be helpful in terms of workforce from what I hear. So
yeah. That's sort of what I heard at the APBA, is that it helped.
I really feel like that's like in terms of appealing or educating or make awareness campaign, it should come from universities. That would be a better, like I feel like they have more connections and they also would increase their enrollment and everything. So there will be more incentives to do that. But like as like the regulation level, I feel like it's more related to, I don't know whether advocacy is the right word, to trying to make sure that the pay structure is a little bit better and that will be more incentive. It would incentivize people to want to be at a lower level in terms of less insured, but still get adequate pay without having to pay more student loan. So I guess I just feel like maybe like what's as us, what we can really focus on versus like, for example, what Pam can focus on from KU's perspective. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, one of the areas, when we have our full board meet every other month, we provide the board with an updated list of how many individuals are currently licensed in each of the different licensure levels for all 7 professions. And I think one of the things that we can do is provide that documentation and post it publicly, which we do, because it kind of spotlights that there are over 600 licensed behavior analysts and only 25 assistant behavior analysts. Because when I look at that number, I think, how is this number so big and continuing to climb? And this other number is so small comparatively, and it's not changing. So is
Right.
that actually an area that could be targeted for some way? So maybe our role is to provide that information, spotlight that information, and then other people could take it and think creatively. So
Because part of it, just to talk about what you were talking about, Alice, is the people, if we were going to engage in advocacy, which is why earlier I told Allison that it would be a CONSAVA or a grassroots effort, because the advocacy for this is going to the insurance companies and saying, look, we want you to create, and I've been advocating for this since 2007, right? A tiered level layer of support. So you have your behavior analyst, you have your lead, your BCABA, and then you have your technicians underneath that, right? And at the time, advocating to the Medicaid program, the autism waiver, they thought that was too confusing. That was too complicated. But we're around enough now that it's seriously a different level of professional support, right? They still need to be supervised, but they're pretty darn, good at what they do for the most part. So, but they're doing it with the support of a BCBA. But it's one of those things where you're going to the insurance company and saying, we want you to change your pay structure and spend more money. And I don't know how well that's going to go over. I may be jaded with my thought process, but for any of those of you on here that are actually out in the field working with insurance companies, trying to get authorizations for services, it's still like a salmon swimming upstream. It's pretty difficult. And so, but it is another advocacy endeavor. I'm not sure. I wonder, David, if we could put out just an opinion paper that in order to build workforce capacity, having a tiered level of support model to help build, it's like middle management, right? To help build a middle layer of professionals that are still under supervision, but have the training and the skill set to function in a supervisory capacity for the technician level. I don't know if we can put out position paper on something like that as a guide to address the workforce capacity? Pickwa?
Sorry, I have two mics to unmute. Um, I just have a quick question because we're on this and I was doing some research. The QABA is another certification that somewhat equivalent to the BACB, right? They also certified people who work with the field ABA, right? So I was looking up what they have, and I found out that there are close to 50 people actually certified with the QABA on the technician level that is, in Kansas. So I was wondering,
Really?
like, one of the way maybe like I don't know currently if we accept though that type of certification.
Yeah, we don't.
So that could be, another way that we can like increase the lower level like workforce because, there's only 48 people in Kansas certified with the QABA and is all mostly in the technician level. So it's because we explored a little bit on, the QABA and we're talking about the different pathways to, providing service, licensing them to provide service. So
Mhm.
that's I want to bring that up. But like I truly enjoy all the conversations on, how to promote that. I do agree with Alex that I think the university need to do something. But we also face the same issue is that once you spend 4 years on the bachelor level to get the BCABA and it's just 2 years away, and then the requirement is not that far off. Right. So there's a small discrepancy between what is required for BCABA versus what is required for BCBA. So I think the most logical sense is like to not worry about the BCABA level and just go for the BCBA level. So that kind of explains why we don't see a lot of BCABA in the field. And then maybe, the QABA side could be something that we could explore and work with them.
Yeah, as in addition to what you just said, Pickwa, there are a lot of bachelor's level people that could theoretically take the coursework and do the supervision to qualify them to become a BCABA, but they don't want to become a BCBA. What they want to do is get a master's degree in social work or speech language pathology or, occupational therapy or something like that. And so that would give them a dual credential. And so I wouldn't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, in terms of not promoting that bachelor's level, because we do have, and you can speak better to this, the two of you and Pam, but we do have a lot of people in our undergrad programs that are not necessarily want to go on to become a master's level BCBA. They're interested in a different field, but we could promote that dual license opportunity for them.
And just to provide a little bit of history on this topic, so in the statutory definitions for the behavior analyst profession, that's under KSA 65-7502. It basically talks about the qualifications for licensed behavior analysts and assistant behavior analyst. And in the definition, it says an individual who is certified by the certifying entity and meets the licensing criteria as established by the board, basically. In the definition of certifying entity, the language in the statute says it means a national accredited behavior analyst certification board, BACB, or other equivalent national accredited non-governmental agency approved by the BSRB. And so a few years back, there was a question about whether the other entity that you had mentioned, the QABA, would be equivalent. And so there was sort of a presentation by a representative from that entity. The advisory committee had an opportunity to ask questions, and then the advisory committee had a discussion about whether they would make a recommendation to the board that it appeared to be equivalent or not. This was maybe about 3 to 4 years ago or so. And I believe at that time, the advisory committee, after reviewing the information, made a recommendation to the board. They didn't believe that it was equivalent. So they forwarded a recommendation to the board. Now it's still, the advisory committee is limited in its authority. It's really a body for making recommendations. So ultimately, it is still the board deciding to accept that recommendation or to consider other things or reach a different decision. And so it is still up to the BSRB board in terms of how they want to handle that. But that was sort of a little bit of the history. About 3 or 4 years ago, there was sort of a review of the entity at that time. It was all, public meetings, and then the board received that recommendation. But, if it is something the advisory committee would want to review again, or maybe see if there have been changes from that program in the last few years, that could be something the committee could pursue. You could have an individual representative from that group come and talk about the program. So that is something that you could consider. But I thought maybe a little bit of the history on that would be helpful. But like I said, it's been about 3 or 4 years. So I'm remembering things, I believe, but it's been a little time since I thought about that. So
Yeah, I'm looking back through my folders to see if I can find when it was. Qualifications.
I'd also be interested in knowing other professions. How many of the other professions have various entities that provide certification or licensure, like alternate ways? So, I just don't know that off the top of my head.
are you talking about for the other professions?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so basically a lot of the other professions licensed by the board have language that is similar. Most of the statutes don't specifically name a recognized national accrediting body. They would usually in the statute say a nationally recognized accrediting body or an equivalent process. And then in the regulations, it's usually in the regulations where the regulation names, okay, the board is accepting KCREP, for example, as a national accrediting body for professional counseling, but would allow an alternate path for individuals that did not attend or receive their education KCREP accredited school. And then in those regulations, it would also spell out, for people who did not come from an accredited program, here are what we're looking for in terms of the program level requirements and also the coursework level requirements to establish that substantial equivalency. I don't think your regulations are that detailed, but a lot of the other professions, for many years, we didn't have a national accrediting body that was widely accepted for addiction counseling. And only in the last few years has the board recognized an accrediting body for addiction counseling. So essentially, everybody kind of filtered through the standards that were in the regulation for programs and coursework. And there's been a conversation for the psychology profession about, we have APA accreditation of psychology programs, but there's another accrediting body that is more focused on a different topic, and the name of that other body is escaping me. But there have been conversations about this for other professions too. But usually, when this topic has come up with some frequency, the regulations are sort of modified to kind of spell out what would be the other factors you're looking for to establish substantial equivalency. And this, it's a little bit more of a fluid type evaluation process. And so the board would have some flexibility to look at things and establish, is it substantially equivalent or is it not? So.
It was
I would add, however, none of the other professions require someone to hold a certification before they can have a license. Right? Isn't that
right.
what she was part of what she was asking?
Well, and it's rare for the certification board to be listed in statute like it is here.
Right.
So,
And
Yeah.
there was a lot of discussion at the time, and Kansas can't delegate authority. And the closest we could get it in was to say like the BACB or other qualifying entity or something like that. It was 2022 because I just found the email, the notice of pending litigation and the intent to add the Kansas BSRB to litigation currently pending in U.S. District Court for in Texas. But nothing ever came of that. They didn't. When we decided not to honor the QABA request to be recognized, they added us to litigation. But nothing, I never heard anything else about it. So I'd be reluctant to ask them to come back, David, because I don't want to open us up to another. They seem to be litigious, but you know, if we could, if anybody wants to explore it, we could, or not. We could let it ride. That's been what, 4 years ago? So we could let it ride for another 4 years, see where they are at the time, and then we can be centrists, middle of the road, see how many other states actually adopt, and then make a decision at that point. Does that sound fair?
I wanted to say something just from the practice implications that we're seeing. So with all the federal audits going on for ABA, Colorado just had theirs done. Like, I love the tier level of support. I just don't think we're going to see progress right now trying to get them to allow us to bill another level. And then another issue we run into is Kansas, some of these positions, work beautifully if the family has a Kansas insurance, but there's so many federal policies out there right now. Then we get tied up and there's so much confusion for families because they can't access their services because of this federal policy and the federal rules that don't have to follow the state rule. So there's a lot to think about in all of this and how it plays out and the confusion it can sometimes create for our families accessing these services.
I agree with you. Unfortunately, I don't think it's unique to behavior analysis. I think it is the insurance industry as a whole is fairly convoluted. Unfortunately, but I think we may want to, because I need to be done at 2:55. I have to go pick my grandson up from school. So he supersedes the last 5 minutes of the meeting. But I personally and professionally, I would like to continue this discussion and just really talk about it. And I like to consider myself very amenable to an interdisciplinary approach to treatment. I like to consider the fact that I play nice in the sandbox for the most part. But sometimes I find myself being a behavior analytics snob. And as a lot of online degree programs came about, I started, as the field shifted from a PhD program to a master's level clinical program instead of a research program, that I was seeing a lot of people come out without a really foundational understanding of our science. and looking at our strategies as tools in a tool belt instead of as a basic science approach. And so I really would entertain continued discussion on this topic to see where we all really fall on that spectrum. Do we really want to entertain a different credentialing body rather than the BACB? Is there, how do we really, as an advisory committee, what is our position on it? And so that we're in a as much as a unified position as possible to provide recommendations to the broader board to be able to support continued reliance on our credentialing body, the BACB, or open it up, and what are the unintended consequences of that, especially coming back to what's happening with some of these agencies that are engaged in fraudulent practices, and what is that doing to our field? So it really is a hot topic. Sorry, Denise.
I'm sorry to interrupt. If I could add to, if we continue this discussion, can we also have the discussion of what's the purpose of adding this licensure? Is it to increase workforce, for example, so that we're all clear on that? And then have the discussion of, so what's the role of the licensing board in that?
Yeah.
And what do we see from those other states that do license this kind of, and has it in fact increased workforce? So just some additional factors to consider in the discussion.
Thank you, Denise. That is another good thing, David, when you put out the query, is has allowance of the QABA in Texas would be a really good one to ask, because they now allow that. And I think we have a pretty good relationship with our Texas constituents. Has it really increased the workforce, right, available to consumers? So that would be something we could put out there too, wouldn't it?
Well, I'll try to get a good idea of all the states that maybe accept that level, either explicitly or have found it to be equivalent. And then I'll just kind of collect information about if they're tracking how many individuals have come in through that path, and information surrounding that. So
thank you. You're very good with that. So we spent a lot of time talking about this, which I think we have 4 minutes left.
And Linda, if you want me to go really quickly, I could probably resolve most of those items very fast if you want.
Okay. Yes. Because I really do need to leave at 5 till.
Okay. For advisory committee membership, we reached out to everyone who had a term that would be expiring at the end of June 2026. No one is reaching their maximum length of service, but 2 members were reaching the end of a term. That was Alec Bernstein and Wes Dotson. Alec is requesting to be reappointed for a new term on the board or the advisory committee. Wes Dotson, we were unable to reach him. We've tried multiple times, and it looks like he has missed several meetings in the past year. And so I do think that probably that's a sign that at this point he's not interested in seeking reappointment. So that'll open up a spot on the advisory committee. And so I'll send out a message if you are all comfortable with this. I'll send something out to all licensees and say, this is open to assistant behavior analyst and licensed behavior analyst. If you want to serve on the advisory committee, here's details about that, and send in a resume or CV and a letter of interest, and then the committee will review those and make a recommendation. So are you all supportive of that? Maybe head nods or okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go ahead and take care of that for you so you can discuss individual applicants for the next meeting. There was a recent Supreme Court case. Maybe as homework, I would ask that you take a look at this. We can talk about it at the next meeting. That case is Childs v. Salazar. So if you are not familiar with that case, there was a law in Colorado that banned conversion therapy, and a professional counselor that was licensed in Colorado challenged that law, and at issue One of the issues was whether this was a regulation of conduct or speech, and it got into some First Amendment type topics. And so ultimately, the Supreme Court has made a decision to refer that case back to the lower court to use a different standard to evaluate this. But I do think it's relevant to licensing boards, and so please take a look at Childs v. Salazar. If you're not used to reading Supreme Court opinions, you can find those online. This one is maybe 60 pages in total, but really it's the first 20 or 25 that are the court's decision. There's something called a concurring opinion by a couple of the Supreme Court justices. There's a dissenting opinion by one, but if you could review that, we can talk about it at the next meeting.
You have 1 minute.
And then title protection, I've collected responses from about 6 different agencies, maybe 7 or 8. I'll continue to collect those through the listserv, and we can bring those back and talk about them at the next meeting.
Thank you, David. So our next meeting is Friday, June 12th at 1 o'clock. Mark your calendars. Sorry for having to end 5 minutes early, but I need to get there to pick them up. Any last minute topics in the last 30 seconds? No.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I'd like to, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn. Motion.
Motion? Do I have a
I'll
second?
second.
All right.
I'll
Thank you, Denise. Thanks. All right. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. We're out of here. All right. Thank you, guys.
everyone.
Thanks for the discussion. Bye.
Bye.